Welcome everyone to the October 22nd, 2020 special meeting, a joint meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council and our esteemed Planning Commission. Hello, Chair of the Planning Commission, Deborah Schwartz. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Let's go to roll call, please.
Very good. I'll call roll call for the council members and then for the planning commissioners. Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. Mayor Pro Tem Snedden.
Here.
Councilmember Friedman. Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Chair Schwartz.
Here.
Planning Commission Vice Chair Wiscombe.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Bonderson.
Here. Good morning.
Planning Commissioner Escobedo.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Higgins.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
And Planning Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Thank you.
And I'm here. Ms. Gorman,
And Mayor Rio.
an announcement that Councilmember Friedman is chairing the Central Coast Water Authority meeting this morning. That's the agency that oversees state water supplies, pretty important stuff. He will join us as soon as he can. And an announcement for our group and for the public that general public comment, items that are not on the agenda, items that don't have anything to do with planning, because today's proceedings cover a whole lot of planning, that will take place at the end of the meeting. So we will go right into our staff presentation. Our city planner, Renee Brooke, is here, and she will also give us a rundown of how the meeting is going to run. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Chair Schwartz. I just have some brief introductory comments. Tim, if you don't mind going to the next slide. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I know this is a special meeting. It's not one normally that you hold, although we have been holding semi-annual joint meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council for many years. Typically in the fall is when we like to have our review of the general plan implementation, and through our adaptive management program, we typically are talking about any adjustments to general plan policy or ordinances to make sure that we're still in alignment with our general plan. This joint meeting, the timing worked out perfect for us to check in with the Planning Commission and City Council before we embark on public outreach and stakeholder outreach to receive some high-level direction on some adjustments that we're making to development standards for multi-unit housing, specifically to bring housing downtown. And so that's what the staff presentation will focus on. That's what the bulk of the staff report, your written staff report, was on. Daniel Gullett will give that presentation as soon as I'm done here. I do want to also thank Jessica Metzger and Timmy Bolton for their help in getting this information together. Timmy is running background on this meeting and really appreciate his work on that. So next slide, please, Timmy. So this is the general agenda for today's meeting. Like I said, the focus of the meeting is on our multi-unit housing and mixed-use standards. We'll give a staff presentation. You'll see a timer up on the right-hand part of the screen, as you're seeing right now, through different portions of this agenda to try to keep us on track for a 3-hour meeting. So right after staff presentation, we'll take questions from the Planning Commission and Council, and then public comment, and then get into comments and deliberation. And we'll remind everybody of that at the end of the presentation. If after that there's still time and we run faster than we think, then I'll give a brief overview of our planning division major work efforts and take any comments or questions on that. It was provided to you mostly for information. If we don't have time to do that, we could do that at a subsequent council meeting. So just wanted to let you know. And then with that, I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Good morning, council members and planning commissioners. Thanks for having us here today. To start, I'll give a little bit of context for where we're at and what we want to talk about. Next slide, please. I'll briefly reference our general plan, which directs us to allow as much housing as possible within resource limits to provide an array of lifestyle options for a demographically and economically diverse resident population. Next slide. More specifically, the 2011 land use element says we should encourage rental housing close to transit and easy walking and or biking distance to commercial services and recreational opportunities through smaller unit sizes. Next slide. In 2013, City Council adopted the average unit size density incentive program. So this was to implement those and other policies that made housing a priority for the city. The AUD program encouraged new rental housing with substantially increased densities on a sliding scale based on unit size, and also reduced parking, building setbacks, and open space requirements. Since adopted in 2013, there have been multiple meetings with Planning Commission. City Council formed a housing task force that focused on this program and adjustments that were needed to be made. And Council had made multiple adjustments in the meantime, including last year requiring affordable housing through an inclusionary requirement. There was also a parking requirement increase for larger units outside of the central business district. Just this year, City Council eliminated the minimum parking requirements in the central business district and increased density in parts of the central business district. So in addition to all of those things, Council provided additional direction for further amendments before the trial period ends next year on the AUD program. And we're here today to discuss potential refinements on that direction before starting public outreach. So concurrently with this, we're part of a staff level discussion on the county's regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA. We define our local housing needs with the RHNA. This mandate's now coming from the state every 8 years. And this coming cycle, 2023 to 2032, the numbers are substantially higher. This is because overcrowding and cost burden were added. So we're looking at a need to accommodate an additional 8,000 to 10,000 units. And we would be doing this by adding zoning capacity with these new multi-unit housing standards that we'll be discussing today, and accounting for the additional zoning capacity we have with accessory dwelling units. Next slide, please. So the big change that we're looking at is an adjustment to regulating building size versus density. So what's the difference? So density is the number of units you can have per land area. So based on your parcel size, you know the number of units you can have. So building size is different. So this we would regulate the actual floor area of the building instead of density. So AUD is density based. It doesn't control the building size currently. The advantages to regulating building size instead, we can have better neighborhood compatibility, a more predictable process for developers and the community, and additional smaller units. Next slide, please. So the way we regulate building size is through what's called FAR. It's a floor to lot area ratio. And this is simply having the size limit of a building proportional to a property size. So these standards can be made sensitive to context and location, including within and adjacent to historic districts. And using FAR, we can also better incentivize rental and affordable housing with different housing tiers. Next slide, please. So this is the current AUD map. So where the FARs would apply is all the colored areas in here. So how this would look different with FARs, there would be numbers associated with the different areas of the city. So it's a finer grained control on building sizes. So we would have the largest buildings in the center of downtown and in some commercial areas as appropriate. Next slide, please. So we would have different FARs for different parts of town, and then within an individual property, we're proposing to have different tiers of FARs. So on a property, the lowest tier would allow for ownership condominiums that are market rate. Next slide. And then tier 2, larger buildings would be for rental housing and mixed use with rental. Next slide. And the largest tier would be for affordable housing. So this would be housing that goes beyond what we have for inclusionary. So this would be similar to the conversation that the city's had with the 711 North Milpas project. We would be allowing for a larger building with certain affordable housing parameters, and we would be looking to target moderate, low, and very low income housing. Next slide. So I'll be covering multiple topics in this presentation. So I'm posing some questions in each, and this is just to give you decision makers a flavor of the feedback we're looking for. We don't expect everyone to answer these questions. We're just, this is kind of the direction and that we would think would be helpful for this conversation. Next slide. The next topic is unit size, and we'll start with the small. So again, the general plan calls for a variety of housing types. This is micro units. So we had some conversation about this last year. The Cosmos study actually recognized a demand for micro units in downtown. So these units are small. They're typically fully equipped, so everything fits in an efficient manner. They're as small as 220 square feet, which is essentially the size of a single car garage. So these are better incentivized by FARs because the density of a project that has all micro units would be very high, and it'd be hard to regulate that otherwise. These are most appropriate downtown, where there's a lot of different community amenities, proximity to employment. So we are looking to require a higher minimum square footage outside of downtown. So we don't have micro units in areas that are less appropriate, like Upper State Street, Alomar area, but we do want to encourage these downtown. Next slide. On the other end is the large. So the AUD predecessor, which was referred to as variable density, resulted in many large luxury units. The AUD was created in response to that program. So the AUD limits average unit size to 811 to 1,450 square feet, depending on the density. And we want to continue to control maximum average unit size, and we're seeking feedback on what that should be and what considerations we should make with that. Next slide, please. So related questions to unit size. Should we be introducing a minimum unit size outside of CBD? And then should we retain the existing range for maximum unit sizes or study reducing those? Next slide. The next topic is adaptive reuse. And by adaptive reuse, we're referring to a conversion of existing non-residential buildings to residential. This is highly encouraged. It's much more sustainable and resource efficient than demolishing and building new buildings. It maintains the urban fabric, existing streetscape. It helps balance jobs and housing. So it eliminates employment space and replaces it with housing directly. difficulties with doing this with our current regulations are zoning open space, setbacks, height limits. So those are currently limiting. And we want to consider retaining some commercial on the ground floor in some areas. So like along State Street, so we have that urban feel, that urban form. And we also have areas in the city with neighborhoods serving commercial, like San Andreas, Micheltorena. We do want to retain some commercial to serve those neighborhoods moving forward. Next slide, please. So related questions to this is there a willingness for flexibility on open yard setbacks, parking for conversion to residential of these existing buildings, and we'd like some feedback on requiring ground floor commercial in some places. Next slide. The next topic is building heights. So building heights are regulated both by the city charter and the zoning ordinance. So the city charter has a maximum building height of 60 feet in commercial areas. With the AUD program, 48 feet is now allowed in the central business district, 45 feet elsewhere. The code does allow buildings to go up to 60 feet in commercial zones with planning commission findings. And we think height approval has been an unintentional deterrent for taller rental housing, because those findings point to support for larger buildings for projects that are rental housing. So we're asking your bodies to consider allowing up to 60 feet for certain projects at certain locations. Next slide, please. Related to that is consideration of transition areas, or some call edge conditions for neighborhood compatibility. The first bullet is speaking to adjacency of smaller scale residential zones to these to this zoning with AUD or FAR that allows for larger buildings. And this would be similar to what we have in the code for solar access. So this would be this would have a variable height limitation to provide some relief to building mass into those adjacent zones. The next is allowing for taller buildings in the interior of some blocks. This was brought up multiple times at the AIA charrette yesterday. The architects were, looking far out into the future, what the building form should be downtown. And multiple groups were identifying the better acceptance of larger buildings in the middle of blocks and being more sensitive to those edge conditions along streets. So this could be coupled with the 60-foot height limitation, just allowing for those larger buildings away from the street some distance. And that could be for those tier 2 or tier 3 projects that are just the rental or the affordable housing projects. Next slide, please. So our questions were regarding to building height. Should we allow up to 60 feet by right for small rental and affordable units? So that's tier 2, tier 3. And then in specific locations, what considerations should we have on those things? And then retain existing height limits adjacent to some streets. So we provide additional building relief in some areas. And then require transitions adjacent to residential zones. We don't have those now. You could build in those areas now. And we see, and we're hearing from the public that that would be desirable. Next slide, please. The last topic I have is incentivizing solar. So solar installations, we see this on Granada Garage. If they're attached to an elevated structure like a pergola, they're included in the building height. So because of that, these solar arrays on elevated structures compete for desired outdoor space like roof decks, and also the building itself. So if there's an elevated structure, the rest of the building has to be shorter to accommodate it. So we're asking for consideration of well-designed supporting structures to extend above the height limit that provide for solar power. Next slide, please. And the question to the group is, should we exclude solar installations from building height measurements if the supporting structure meets objective design criteria? Next slide. And this slide shows a timeline of this next phase of AUD amendments. It's the final phase of AUD amendments because the program is set to expire in August of next year. So we would go to public outreach next month and through the end of the year, and then begin environmental review January, February of next year, and then design board hearings February, March, and then ordinance hearings before your bodies April through July of next year. Next slide. And this slide's just a summary of those topics and the feedback we're seeking from your groups today. And that concludes my presentation.
And you did it with time to spare. Go ahead and stop that clock. So I see a couple of other slides, but this is the time for questions. Okay.
I think, Timmy, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide,
I was wondering.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Dan. That was great. We have time to spare, and so we can certainly use that throughout any other portion of this hearing. What shows on the screen here is how we've allocated time for the remainder of the hearing. So to the extent we can stick to this, we hopefully can get through it. And then, like I said, if there's time after we wrap up the discussion of these development standards, then we can spend any remaining time talking about the major work efforts in the planning division. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Brooke. Thanks, Mr. Gullett. So questions of staff now, and planning commission members will go first. 20 minutes. I'm going to be keeping track of your time. Don't mean to be rude, but that's how we're going to do it. And then city council questions of planning staff, planning staff, and then public comment, 30 minutes. So Ms. Gorman, if you're keeping track of people who are on the call, it'll be 3 minutes. If we have time for 3 minutes, it'll be 2 minutes if a whole bunch of people want to speak. And then as you can see on the screen, planning commission will make their comments, we'll take a break, and then city council will come back. We hope for an hour of deliberations on these important subjects. So it looks like Mr. Higgins, you're all ready. Commissioner Higgins, go ahead with your questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So for staff, what is the distinction that state HCD makes with respect to ownership units or rental units that are sort of these numbers are coming from above? My inclination is that they don't decipher that, but do they?
They do not.
And what happens if we don't cooperate with the HCD objectives this cycle and then next cycle? And I know that may be hard to answer with certainty, and it may be a legal question, but I'd like some context about those parameters.
I'll ask a clarifying question. If we don't comply with the RENA zoning?
Correct. What happens?
May defer to Ms. Brooke.
Sure. Sure, Commissioner Higgins. So what we've seen in the last couple of years is legislation that gives HCD some more weight for agencies that aren't showing production of housing. Up until very recently, you know, RENA had been a target that we try to meet through zoning capacity. But with legislation recently, there's been pressure on agencies to actually produce the housing, or else other things could happen. Legislation is passing to streamline housing production for those agencies that aren't showing that they're producing it on their own. So it's through increased pressure and loss of local control. If we don't find a way locally to produce the housing that the state is asking us and telling us we need to produce. So
it's conceivable then, you know, sort of worst case scenario is developers can ask HCD to intervene in approving projects. Is that basically the bottom line here?
well, to my knowledge, they haven't done that yet, but what we have seen is just removing local control, where the state is setting up legislation where if projects meet certain criteria, it's a ministerial process for these projects because they've seen in some areas where there's a resistance to housing production.
It looks like
Yes,
Ms. Ostermeyer has something to add.
Yeah, Commissioner Higgins, through the mayor and the chair. If you'll recall, the recent amendments to the Housing Accountability Act allow applicants who are denied a project because the city applies some subjective design standards can go to court and ask the court to force the city to approve the projects. And if the city, I believe, has 60 days if they get such an order to approve the project. If they choose not to, then there's a significant fine for each unit that's not approved. So that's one of the ways that the legislature and HCD are kind of controlling how we produce our numbers.
So thank you. I'll get out of here. Those are my technical questions for staff. My big question though for council is, are we gonna, I would like you all to give us guidance today about whether or not we should really be treating HCD RENA numbers seriously, or if you as a council don't want to do that. That's my rhetorical question. Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Commissioner Lodge. Thank you. You're muted, ma'am.
I have just one question. How does the use of FAR, this is to Mr. Gullett, how does the use of FARs provide for better neighborhood compatibility?
So FAR is it's a simple tool. So what it does is limit building size. So and that's how it better helps neighborhood compatibility than what we have with zoning now. Right now, we have a volume defined by setbacks and building height. So technically under the zoning, you could build within that and meet the zoning. So with FAR, there would be an additional limitation, which would be on the actual floor area of the building. So, and then that can be tailored to historic districts or different parts of the city. We can have larger or smaller building sizes.
Does that mean that HLC and ABR would no longer be considering the question of size, bulk, and scale?
This wouldn't change ABR or HLC's purview. I think what it would do is set a clear expectation from the city to developers and to neighborhoods and to the community of what's generally acceptable in terms of building size.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Lodge. Commissioner Wiscombe and then Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Chair Schwartz. I just have a couple questions. On the staff report on page 4, you talk about land use policy 12.2 for establishing buffers on parcels adjoining historic structures. So do you anticipate, what are these buffers? Do you anticipate minimum setbacks or limiting building heights? Or will it be on a form-based code basis in terms of how you deal with new development adjacent to historic structures? And that's one part of my question. And then the second part is, what does staff actually consider to be a historic structure? Are they structures of merit as well as landmark buildings, or how are we defining that?
Sure. Madam Mayor and Commissioner Wiscombe, I can start by answering your first question, I think, about the buffers. So there's a couple policies that talk about protection of historic resources, some of which we've accomplished through mapping the historic resources. And then within that, we've mapped a 100-foot or I think 300-foot buffer that alerts adjacent property owners and staff to the fact that there is an adjacent historic resource, so that if there's development on the neighboring site, everyone is aware that we need to take extra caution when we're reviewing development on this site. So that's been done. Also, as you know, we're making amendments to our historic resources ordinance, and within that, there's discussion of buffers and sensitivity to not only adjacent to historic resources themselves, but the outer extents of future historic districts. So in some sense, it's an awareness, being alert that there is something nearby and the extra caution should be taken. In terms of FARs, what we've been talking about is, because if we get down to certain blocks having FARs in parts of town, we can also reduce FAR or otherwise in some objective way manage that adjacency to a historic resource or any other sensitive resource we might have, like a creek or something like that. So that can be done, I think, and that's what we'll be working on over the next 6 to 8 months, is really fine tuning those numbers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Okay, and going on to a question about adaptive reuse of existing commercial and office buildings for residential development. You're talking about you recommend no FAR requirement and no parking requirement, I think. That's what, what I wanted to ask about is, what about the adjacent at-grade parking lot that's associated with a potential conversion of a commercial or office building to a residential development? How would that be handled if that's gone and the parking lot was converted?
One approach could be just accepting a non-conforming parking situation. So if there is parking, but it's not the amount of parking that's required by the code for the residential, it's just accepted that it would be underparked. But if you have a building that you're converting in an adjacent parking lot that's parking for that building, that would still need to be provided. So we're talking about adaptive reuse of buildings. We're not talking about new construction on other parts of properties. But does that answer your question?
Well, I'm thinking particularly of the CBD, where we don't really have parking requirements or limited parking requirements. So would you take? So what I'm asking is, what would happen to that parking lot if the owner chose to develop it into housing? How would it be treated? Would it be treated with a FAR or? I know there's not a lot of situations, but we've seen a couple of them at Planning Commission, so.
Right, and we can't anticipate everything, but there would be modifications available for, say you have a large building that's above the FAR that you're converting, and then you don't require parking. I think this is maybe the situation you're describing.
Right.
You want to add a building there, so it's going to be over FAR. So we would at least have the relief valve of a modification for when it's appropriate development available. Otherwise, it would be hard to codify that and allow for like no limit on an FAR if there's adaptive reuse.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Ms. Wiscombe, you're at time. We're trying to keep the meeting moving.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I hope someone else asks your question. Mr. Reed, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So you guys touched on the AIA charrette a bit. And I participated in the charrette knowing that there was a focus on rental housing. And there seemed to be this common theme, and it was presented last night, that rental housing can be maximized by building form flexibility, floor area efficiency, which leads to project feasibility. And so my question would be, considering that the AIA charrette participants are largely design professionals, also some of our more significant downtown housing developers were also a part of that effort. Will the results and findings of the AIA charrette, which I think just started to be presented last night, be used as a more significant consideration in the recommendation of primarily FAR and primarily within the central business district, as I see it as a helpful tool? Also, I would say, would those results be used simply in the development of parameters to determine FAR? Would be my question on that.
Most definitely, that work will inform the work we're doing. We've been coordinating with AIA. I think they know we're working on FAR. They know we're wanting to incentivize micro units. So it's really great to see it in context, and this will certainly be used moving forward.
Great. The staff report cited and your presentation cited the increasing need to accommodate housing capacity. It could even be twice as much as the last RHNA cycle. And just under the assumption that if we are showing the capacity to accommodate those numbers, I'm assuming we're actually motivated in this effort today and ongoing to provide a realistic path for those housing units to be produced. So my question would be, will the FAR, do you intend for the FAR to be sufficient to allow the amount of housing needed in the central business district?
Yeah, well, our intention is to provide regulations for feasible projects that can get built and facilitating additional units beyond what we do now. So this would get us further toward RHNA, and we do have to accommodate the zoning capacity. We don't have a choice.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of maximum unit sizes, and this can be like my last question, or retaining those maximum unit sizes or studying a reduction of them. Can you touched on it? Can you explain in more detail from your perspective the pros and cons of both?
Thanks.
Of regulating maximum unit sizes?
Yeah, or keeping them the same.
Well, so with variable density, we were seeing 2,000 square foot studios here and there, and the difficulty, and I've heard Councilmember Jordan mentioned this too, is we get buildings built and they're around for 100 years. So we're losing opportunity when those units go up. That said, our general plan calls for this variety of units, but we definitely have a need for workforce housing, and that's what we're aimed at right now. And smaller units are more desirable.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of the charrette, Ms. Bonderson or Commissioner Bonderson, I really enjoyed your presentation last night. Go ahead with your questions, please.
Thank you, Mayor Murillo. Thank you. It's nice to hear that. And my question is for Mr. Gullett. I was just interested in hearing sort of a quick summary, maybe a bullet point list, if you don't mind keeping it easy and concise. I was interested in knowing if you could share with us almost like a summary of design points or design goals that may be covered by the form-based code topic. I'm assuming things like building height and that transition area edge conditions you were talking about would fall into that. Is there anything else that you can think of that would fall directly into form-based code?
Well, form-based code can mean many different things. It can be completely prescriptive of what a building looks like, where everything's located down to the details. I think it's best used for new cities. We're a built city, so it's with a variety of building types. So to do a form-based code that prescriptive would be difficult. But we do have aspects of form-based code baked into our code. We have pedestrian master plan that calls for certain improvements on sidewalks. And we do also increase mixed use development. Yeah, this slide shows some differences between traditional zoning and form-based zoning. And the rules we have it's not just the zoning ordinance. We have design guidelines. We have things like the pedestrian master plan that do push on the form. The advantage to not doing the form is there's more design space. So you essentially have a volume to work in versus like having your building must go here and it must look like this. So I think that's a bit of a tension.
Yes, thank you. You knew the question was coming. You had the slide ready. And just in an effort to streamline the FAR discussion that we're talking about right now, based on sort of the overview of what the code talks about, how would this discussion today focused on FARs tie in any of the new topics you may have talked about today? Is it just these that are on the slide today? Do they all fall into form-based?
So all of these topics are related to our final effort with the AED program before we're at FARs. So building size, unit size, adaptive reuse, building heights, like these are all related to FAR. The reason why we're asking these things is we haven't discussed these things yet, and we're about to embark into a public discussion on these topics, and we're wanting feedback, but they're all related.
Okay.
If I might add, and I'll be really quick, just overarching objective with this final amendment package to the AED program is to continue incentivizing housing. And so we've seen over the years with legislation that discretion is being removed from local process. We know one of our next major work efforts will be citywide objective design standards. We need to adopt them. That again will be much more objective, given its name. But the reason that we're moving towards this discussion of floor to lot area ratio is we're trying to streamline the process and increase predictability so that we can get more housing. So whatever we want to call it, if it's form-based or it's objective or it's prescriptive, the point of it is to produce housing and to make it feasible.
That was excellent explanation. I appreciate it. Thank you. That ends my questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Vonderson. I don't see anyone else jumping on. Oh, there you are, Mr. Escobedo. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just maybe 2 or 3 questions. So based on that conversation about form-based code versus FAR, my understanding is that one of the positive aspects of the form-based code is that it makes the process more ministerial by nature. And we see from state legislation that that's kind of where the state is pushing local jurisdictions. So aside from the objective design guidelines, which I know are coming, are there other areas that we plan on building in more ministerial approval rather than discretionary?
Nothing's planned as part of this package. That was the AUD program was formed and to have design review only for these larger projects. And that has changed over time too. So there's comments by Planning Commission, and this package would actually have Planning Commission be a decision maker. So we're adding some discretion to the process with what we're doing now based on what we've experienced and what we think is best. And Ms. Brooke might have something to add.
Sure, I'll just tack on to that. Although there will be some discretion still remaining in the process, we are trying to minimize the number of hearings too, so that, again, the process is streamlined. And then outside of this effort, we are working on other ways to minimize discretion or streamline smaller projects that we might find don't need to go to design review or might be able to be processed ministerially. So that's happening in the background with other types of projects.
Thank you. Next question is regarding building height. In the charter, it states that the maximum building height is 60 feet. And from what I understand, it was decided by the voters that it would be 60 feet. How did we get to the process where it was 45 feet, and then with community benefit, you could get to 60. Now it's 48 feet. You could get to 60 with community benefit with Planning Commission approval.
I can take that one. So the city charter height limit is 60 feet in commercial zones. There was a measure put on the ballot, over 10 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. It was Measure B at the time, to lower the height limit downtown to 45 or 40 feet. It was 40 or 45, and it did not pass. But with that, there was community momentum and decision makers who favored reducing the call it by right housing or height limit downtown. So in 2013, when we adopted the AUD program, with that was another ordinance amendment that took the maximum height limit down to 45 feet. But as Mr. Golett covered earlier in this presentation, through an extra Planning Commission hearing and special findings for certain types of projects, applicants could ask to go up to 60 feet. So it wasn't completely lowered entirely, but you had to jump through some extra hoops to get back up to 60 feet. And then just recently, council bumped that to 48 feet downtown through some urging by developers. So that's a really brief history of a long topic.
Thank you. And just to clarify, rental housing is considered a community benefit project, right?
Absolutely, and it's defined in the code as such. So there's not even a special finding. I mean, doesn't need a special determination. It would need special findings to go above 45 or 48 feet though.
Thank you. Last
quick question. We really need to keep moving.
Yeah. Last question. On slide 29, the third bullet, it states that we're talking about incentivizing solar panels. And it says something to the effect that the panels must have well-designed support structures. And to me, that sounds like discretionary approval. Who would be making that determination? Or as I think the following question stated, is it going to be ministerial approval based on objective standards?
Yeah, so that would be some ministerial approval. We would have to define what those objective standards are. But meeting those objective standards, you could exceed the height limit.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks so much. Chair Schwartz, are you ready to go
Yes.
with some questions? Thank
Yes,
you.
I am. Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My first questions to staff are both from page 1 and 2 of the staff report. On page 1 under executive summary, there's a reference to today's work session focusing on the word final amendments. And there's a reference on page 2 of the staff report to attachment 1. My question to staff is, where do the remaining items that are both on the city's website, the AUD page under remaining amendments package, and in attachment 1, when are those going to be taken up? Because we actually don't have all of the other remaining AUD amendments on our schedule to discuss today. So today couldn't be a final amendments review of the outstanding items, including the administrative changes, which have not been taken up. So Mr. Gullett or Ms. Brooke, could you respond to that for me, please?
Yeah, so we intend to include everything in attachment 1 with the package moving forward. We pulled out these items to get some direction on because we hadn't discussed them in detail previously. We didn't want to revisit things that we think we have clear direction on.
Okay, and then can I just leave something with you, Mr. Gullett? You and I discussed this yesterday. Please do align the city website with this list of remaining amendments package. Again, I'm looking at administrative changes because the city's website has 2 bullet points, and yet our attachment 1 today has 3 bullet points of administrative changes. So I'll just leave that with you if staff could please take a close look at that. My next question is on page 3 of the staff report. And I want to ask you, in the last paragraph, there's the first sentence of the last paragraph. The city plans to account for additional accessory dwelling units, and then it goes on from there. What does that mean, Mr. Gullett, that we plan to account for ADUs?
State law changed, making it ministerial and much easier to get ADUs than they were in 2015. So our housing element is from 2015. It anticipated very few ADUs. So that we have a lot more zoning capacity due to state law changes. So that'll take care of some of our RENA obligation.
Okay, so just specifically referencing the housing element. Okay, very good. Then on page 5 of the staff report, if you could very quickly help me understand how we would bring together a new FAR tier and adaptive use. For example, if the Nordstrom lease is renegotiated to allow for residential development, and let's say in that building, 189,000 square foot, we have some retail on the ground floor, and we have other types of uses up. It could be hotel, and at the top it could be condos or rental units. How do we bring together your proposal for new FAR tiers, especially, for example, condominium ownership and adaptive reuse? Do you have any thoughts today, or should we take that up another day?
Essentially what we're proposing is for adaptive reuse, there would be no FAR limit. If there's an existing building, it can be converted to residential.
Okay. So regardless of the mix of uses, for example, Mr. Gullett. Okay. On that same page, I'm going very quickly, and I'm going to put an email together for staff with additional questions I will have. On that same page, page 5 of the staff report, under incentivizing micro units, there's a reference to downtown being the most suitable location for the highest density and smaller units due to the mix of uses and proximity of residential amenities. And I'm wondering why, with terrific bus, pedestrian, bicycle accessibility, that the east side, specifically Milpas Corridor, and the west side, San Andres Corridor, were not included in here. And if staff doesn't want to respond, I'm interested in council members, Oscar Gutierrez and Alejandra Gutierrez, their thoughts on including these areas within their districts for incentivizing these much smaller sort of efficiency apartments that probably will help us get to affordability. Do you have any quick thoughts for me on that, Mr. Gullett?
Yeah, I think the question right now is where shouldn't these be? And part of the consideration is traffic, because if we get large projects with little units, Upper State Street, that's not really what we want as a city. So just for your consideration.
But it does reference Upper State Street in this paragraph in terms of larger units, right? Establishing, okay, 220, and then areas such as Upper State, significant number of new units. So I guess more to follow on that. It sounds like we need more discussion perhaps, and I'll follow up with you on that. My last question is on page 6 of the staff report. Under maximum average unit sizes, there's a sentence here that triggered a question. You say a rent collected from AUD projects has been higher than originally anticipated. Now, I'm wondering what the status is of the rent survey that we've been requiring of AUD project owners. And I'm thinking back, Council Member Jordan, to when you, Commissioner Campanella, and I began meeting with staff around 2015 to devise ways of measuring the success of the AUD program. And we came up with this rent survey, but I haven't seen data recently. Do you have a comment for me on that? Commissioner, Mr. Gullett or Ms. Metzger?
Ms. Metzger might.
Yeah.
Through the mayor, yes, Chair Schwartz, we are still collecting the survey information. This year, I did give an extra month for collection due to COVID and what was happening with that, but we received all of the rent surveys around mid-August to late August. And then some of the other newer projects are due at the end of December. So I'd be happy to share that information with you. I don't have it currently in the presentation, but I can do that offline.
Okay, I'll just close by saying I think that's very important data for us to understand across the city, because I think we're going to find quite a diversity of rent ranges by neighborhood. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I need to announce that Councilmember Friedman has joined the meeting. He joined it a few minutes ago. We will now go to City Council member questions. And I will, Mr. Jordan, you go first. And I am asking the clerk to count how many people are there for public comment so we can divide up the time appropriately. Mr. Jordan, your
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Gullett, help me gain some time back here. So on the tiers, can you, I realize it's early, but can you do a combination of tiers? Can you do a 2 and a 3? Can you do a 1 and a 2? Could you do a 1 and a 2 and a 3? Will that all just be fleshed out, but that's still kind of something to come?
Well, we're proposing 3 thresholds essentially. If it's market rate condos, 1 tier, rental with inclusionary 1 tier, and then this defined additional inclusionary 20% moderate. We don't know yet. We want to be sure like it'll pencil out for a developer, like the 3rd tier. Are you suggesting additional?
I'm saying, for example, a project that would have both market rate and inclusionary, the equivalent of inclusionary. That would be possible under these tiers?
Yes, yeah. So with the tiers, there would just be, it would be a percentage of affordable housing. It wouldn't be 100% affordable.
Works for me. And then this might be for you or Ms. Brooke. The PC findings for community benefit to go to 60 feet downtown. I can't recall that in the downtown core, actually can't recall that happening. There was a sanctuary project I remember that made the grade. But so one could probably make the case that those are limiting. I don't know that that's true or not, but I've just never seen that happen. What's the process for amending that ordinance to make it more friendly for some of these changes that we'll be making? So it actually if we could agree that it doesn't incentivize enough now, it will be more incentivizing to make those determinations as a community benefit project.
Sure, I can take that, Councilmember Jordan. So we've had a couple non-residential projects request to go above the height limit, to go up to, not up to 60 feet, but to exceed 45 feet. And that was the Museum of Art. I believe the police station building pending will be requesting that as well. In terms of residential, we've had sanctuary centers, but then they were able to exceed the height limit due to other law that's in place. And then the Planning Commission did recently receive a request to go above 45 feet downtown, but right at the time when council increased the height to 48 feet, so that wasn't necessary. And then there was another project downtown that's proposing to go, I think, up to 52. But in my discussions with developers about why more of them have not requested to add another floor of housing, it was this extra hearing and this discretionary action that was deterring them from that, because it's an unknown in the process. So that's why we're proposing, if there's a way that we can just build into the code that if a project meets these certain criteria, you could propose up to 60 feet. Now, granted, there's other standards, objective and subjective, that would come into play too, to make sure that it's still compatible.
Okay, there's kind of a catch-all in that requirement on compatibility that just is kind of the mischief line in it, I found. So, and then Mr. Gullett, on the determination of percentages in your tiers, since tier 3 is not subject to a government subsidy, we would be able to set policy on what percentage would be that requirement. So say instead of being 80 to 120, it could be 80 to 200. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then last question is, I know the legal team is online. I'd really like to get started on an answer of, or a discussion, an answer of this discussion on the HCD and the RENA numbers. And are we going to, or whose role is it to decide that we will or won't treat the RENA targets as a requirement to match policy with? Where is that decision made? Is it made at council? Is it made somewhere else? And when do we have that discussion?
Ms. Ostranger, go ahead, please.
Ms. Brooke, did you want to take that or would you like me to?
Sure, well, I can jump in just in terms of process. So RENA sets our target for the zoning capacity that we must try to accommodate over that 8-year period. It goes along with updating our housing element. So our housing element right now is from 2015 to 2023. We'll be embarking on an update to that in the next year or so. And so our policies in that housing element must align and show that we can produce this housing. So that's the procedural legislative process that goes through. So as that housing element update goes through Planning Commission and Council, your decision-making bodies will ensure that the policies allow for production of the housing.
I think that's my quick answer, right? The determination of chasing it or not chasing it, other than the being able to, on paper, get to it, is a policy decision for City Council, right? Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Mayor.
Thanks. Ms. Sneddon, are you ready to go? I see you're next in line.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry. I'd like to add something to Ms. Brooks' response to Councilmember Jordan, if I might.
Yes.
So we can concur that complying with RENA numbers is a council policy decision, but it's a policy decision that has legal consequences. If our general plan is not consistent internally, or if the housing element is inadequate, that has legal ramifications with regard to grant funding, litigation, and otherwise. So it's a bit of an understatement to say it is a policy decision. It's a policy decision that's heavily governed by state law.
Well said, sir. Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 4 sort of quickish questions. One of them is for the FAR, when we're considering that, is there a way to have that apply to a whole block? Like you could have a maximum FAR for a block. I'm thinking of, so, maybe a block can handle one massive project the size of, say, 7-Eleven Milpas, but then when you're talking about right next door, could it handle another one? And so if we're looking at FARs per parcel, is there also a way to talk about that for, and especially for a sensitive area or historic district, or CBD might have a different block maximum, but how many massive structures on a block, something like that?
I may defer to Mr. Kalan or Ms. Ostringer. I think you're asking if development on one property affects development potential on another. And I haven't seen that. I don't know the answer to that.
That might be a property rights issue. Mr. Kalan, Ms. Ostringer, please.
I can take it at a pretty general level, unless Ms. Ostringer, do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so every land use decision that affects a single site has the potential to affect neighboring sites. And that's taken into account as a matter of constitutional due process, going back to the mid-70s in California by providing notice to the neighboring property owners so that they can participate in the process. So there is not a direct one-to-one relationship. You could effect that kind of relationship through buffer zones or other types of regulatory measures.
Okay, so if we go the route of FARs per parcel and that goes into ministerial type approval, then we lose the ability to have discretion over what that does for the neighborhood or the block or the next door unit. Is that?
You would lose discretion at the permit level, but you would retain discretion to legislate consequences or conditions that connect the different properties.
Thank you. And then for, I guess it's a similar type of question when we're talking about maximum height limits. And Mr. Gullett, you mentioned that maybe it could be in certain places or certain zones. And I'm wondering, it's something I've wondered about a lot, is if we can have different height limit requirements depending on, or maximums, depending on whether something is in a swale or on a local peak or local high. I mean, as we go across the city, we go, generally upward towards the mountains, and there are lower points and higher and lower and higher, and a 60-foot height limit in a swale wouldn't have the same impact as a 60-foot building up on a local high. And is there a way, or could there be a way, when we're talking about increasing height limits, to take that into account? Would that even be possible?
Well, we can assign different height limits for different locations. So, and there may be reasons such as topography or adjacency to cliffs or other tall buildings.
Okay, or creeks, I think was mentioned also, or different sensitive. Okay. And then just two quick more for RHNA numbers. How do the recent changes from the state's ADU allowances, how does that affect our zoning and how we're complying with, or are we taking those numbers into account in meeting that RHNA requirement?
We will be. We haven't, but we will be in the next cycle. So that'll be a lot more capacity, just that.
Okay. Anywhere near meeting our capacity or drop in the bucket? Like,
we haven't looked at HCD's suitable sites requirements yet. So we haven't done that exercise yet, but we will.
okay, I think that'll be important to weigh when we're trying to meet numbers. And then really quickly, for co-op type housing, I know we don't really have that here, but I think it might be sort of coming in the future, more co-op housing. What tier would you imagine that would fall into, or is that something we would just determine later?
I'd say up for discussion. It's currently qualifies for priority housing overlay, including rentals. So that would be, tier 2 or tier 3.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks. Ms. Harmon, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you. And thanks to our Planning Commission colleagues for those really detailed questions. They were very helpful. So I want to just pull us back a little bit and take maybe a 50,000-foot view specifically of the FAR discussion. Mr. Gullett, if you don't mind, I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding the direction that you're looking for from me today, because my support of the FAR concept and these tiers are really going to be contingent on the FAR specific number that you develop. So for example, if the FAR currently is 0.25 and the proposal that we have is 0.3, I'm not going to be supportive of that. So I guess I'm just wondering if you can talk to us, tell me a little bit about really the direction you're looking for, because it seems that so much of this depends on the specific FAR that comes out. I guess I'm not clear what direction I'm supposed to be giving you.
Yeah, well, so the new concept that we're putting forward is these different tiers and how we should look at these different tiers. We don't have numbers yet. As I said, the IAA charrette will inform that. We will be doing public outreach and getting a sense of the community's acceptance of different size buildings in different parts of the city. But at this point, there's clear direction from council to move forward with FARs, and then today we're looking for, how should we approach the tiers? Like what kind of affordability level is desirable, and that'll inform like how big the FARs are too, because we do want to get the market to build some affordable housing for the city.
Great, thank you.
And Councilmember Harmon, I would just add that we don't need to get hung up on how many tiers there are and exactly what goes into which tier. We presented that idea as a concept that what types of housing development do we most want to incentivize? And so that direction from council today would be great. And then we can take that and work through the public outreach and our ordinance drafting, and then of course come back through Planning Commission and Ordinance Committee and the design boards with the details of it. But for us to make our work productive, it would be good if we heard from the council of, yes, rental above all else, or these income targets, and then we'll do the detail work.
So thank you. That's extremely helpful. I really appreciate that. And two more quick ones. I'm just going to focus on FAR for now, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor. On the definition of FAR, my understanding is typically we exclude, or cities would exclude like elevator areas or parking. I'm trying to think of what other areas, but are we excluding parking from the calculation of FAR? Are we excluding like elevator shafts? Are we sort of going with the standard typical understanding of FAR, or are we including things like parking in our city's conceptualization of this?
Well, what our approach is to this point was to regulate everything you can see, essentially. So if there's a parking podium, like that's part of it. That's not, I mean, we do things different now, but we want to move toward regulating what you see. So it includes elevator shafts and everything else to get that building size set and clear expectations set.
What would that do if our purpose is to incentivize denser housing and get more housing units? What is the implication of including those areas into the FAR calculation?
Potentially none. If we anticipate that those areas are included in the FAR, then that's the building size that's acceptable.
But if we didn't include them, could we in theory get more units?
It depends on what the FAR number is.
Okay.
I might take a quick stab at that because what happens now with average unit size density and that each parcel has a maximum density, once a developer has maximized that density, there still might be space within the allowed building envelope for other things, whether it be laundry facilities, a gym, parking. And so that space could be filled up with non-housing units. So our concept in regulating everything you see is, we hope that it incentivizes maximizing all that floor area with housing units and not parking and not, other things that would take away from maximizing housing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. That's it for now, Madam Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, are you there? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to address some of what Chair Schwartz commented on in regards to the micro units on the east side and west side. Could you again, Mr. Gullett, just kind of reiterate why they're not there, or why they're not being proposed to be built there?
Why they're currently not being proposed, or why the changes are?
Yeah, why they're currently not being proposed.
So right now, the number of units you can have on a property is dependent on the average unit size. And in some areas where you can get the most units, the average unit size you can get the most units with is 811 square feet. So we're seeing a lot of projects around that average of 811 square feet. So to get, if you're doing micro units, your building comes way down, because you could fit a few micro units in the same space as a 811 square foot unit. So I think that's why we're not seeing them proposed currently. And the question to Planning Commission and Council is, where should these micro units be, essentially, and where should they not be?
Okay. So on that same issue, what's keeping a property owner from converting these micro units, let's say if they are built on the west side or the east side, into a hotel or into some sort of Airbnb?
So it's a different land use. So hotel, Airbnb is a commercial land use, and that's regulated differently. There's different approvals, different limitations on that. They're allowed in different zones. So that's not to say you could have a project come in that converts to hotel, but it's more difficult to do that the way we regulate commercial floor area.
And if they started doing it, it would be illegal, Councilmember Gutierrez. So.
Sure. Yeah, it's illegal now because there's that ordinance restricting it. But if that were to change, which is what I'm afraid, do not own vehicles.
So the parking requirement remains outside of Central Business District. So it's still one space per unit, and with these micro units, your parking space is about as big as your unit, but it has to be provided in those areas of town still.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter if these units are being built by bus stations or anywhere. That won't keep them from owning a car, right?
So the parking is still required, and the parking would be in line with the demand for automobile use too, just because we expect single occupancy of these small units.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm hearing you loud and clear, Councilmember Gutierrez. When we get to comments, we'll, you just make it clear that micro units are appropriate for certain areas and not for others. So thanks. Mr. Friedman, questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do have many of my questions were answered by the previous discussion. So I want to focus on two specific issues, which I don't believe have come up in a different way. The first one is going to have to do with maximums and minimums. And the second is inclusionary numbers. I'll start with the maximum and minimums. This is a key issue on what's the process that we're going to establish for the maximum minimums, because what I'm concerned about is that, one, we need to have types of units that encourage diverse populations. So if we have a lot of 220, you're excluding a lot of populations that might not be able to fit into those. The other part of it is for the maximum number, if we have too low of a minimum and a maximum, you could theoretically have a gaming of the system where you create just enough of the 220 to offset having large units, which is what happened at a variable density. So what is the process to allow the diversity of unit sizes in there and not allow someone to come in and say propose a bunch of 1,400 square foot units with some 220s to offset it to get to that example, the 811 average that we now have?
So the maximum we're proposing as an average still. So that's what we have now. We are seeing a mix of units now with that because it's an average. The minimum would just be a floor. You can't have anything smaller than the minimum. So like you said, we do want a diversity of units, and this is something that we would keep an eye on over time too. And the market's going to change. We don't know what the demand is for the 220 square foot units. Maybe there's a lot now, and after several are built, there's none. It's just something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But if there's any considerations you want us to have moving forward with this, please share.
And I'll say my comments for that later, but just to reiterate, as we get away from the proposal right now, as we get away from downtown central business district, the minimum goes up because a 220 minimum would create more density. I think that gets kind of to what Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez was mentioning. So as we get into the residential neighborhoods, we use a different minimum or to address the concerns of those neighborhoods, congestion, parking, those things. Do I have that understanding correct, Mr. Gullett?
That's what we're proposing.
Okay. And then, so inclusionary housing, this kind of follows up, Councilmember Jordan touched on it, that we could go 120 to 200. It's really kind of a decision that we need to make rather than just the 80 to 120. So our ownership currently for inclusionary for ownership goes up to 160. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So in terms of creating these tiers, is there a way that we could mirror rental with inclusionary, especially if we're going to get into potentially mixing types of years? So you have a proposal, as was discussed before, you might have some ownership and some rental. And there are many jobs in the community that are critical jobs that would fall above the 120 percent of area median income, but they're still critical jobs within that 120 to 160. So would we be able to mirror the ownership if we so chose for rental?
Yes, unless there's some rule from HCD in review of our housing element, because our obligations are for very low, moderate, and then it's just above moderate. So the tier to 160 is for middle income. So that's not something that the state wants us to target, and there may be an issue there. I don't know. But
So I'd just like more information than that as we go forward to study, because there's a critical workforce that's in the 120 to 160, or you could even argue that to the 200, but especially 120 to 160. The last question I have is
quick one.
Please. Yeah, it has to do with, in the central business district, we have 10% instead of 15% for inclusionary. Using the FARs, is there a way to encourage to get that extra 5% in the central business district using incentives with FARs or other types of incentives?
So just really quickly, so I mean, inclusionary is an obligation on the developer, and with FAR, that third tier, it's kind of a carrot. It's like you can get a bigger building if you're doing voluntarily additional affordable units versus inclusionary. So we will be looking at inclusionary coming up, and yeah, any other information you guys have that you want us to look into, we're happy to.
That would be one, how we can incentivize greater inclusionary within the central business district using the FAR, the increased FAR to get to that 15 or even 20% in that area. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez. Go ahead with your questions, please.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted. Oops.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning. As everybody knows, I'm new to the council. Mr. Gullett, can you, in very simple forms, explain to me, like if you were in a public forum, what micro units mean in a very simple form?
Super small apartments for a single person.
Okay, so in my district, where Voluntario changes to Punta Gorda, would those housing that are in that area be considered micro units? They're right next to the freeway. They were very controversial when they got built.
I don't think there's like crystal clear definition of what a micro unit is, but it's essentially like single room occupancy. So it's, as I said, it can be about the size of a single car garage.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know.
So what staff is proposing is to not have them. I'm just trying to understand the suggestion that Mr. Gutierrez was asking. So not to have it on the east side and west side because it's already dense.
Yes. So we're suggesting to not allow the micro units outside of downtown, essentially, just to focus that type of development downtown.
So when my only concern with that is, he gave a really good example about parking. There isn't any parking in both those areas because you still, even though we are not giving out as many permits or people are not building for whatever reason, there's still, converted garages that are not permitted. I mean, people are still fitting in people in their homes that is considered illegal, and then you have those people that have one extra car. I'm just a little concerned that because we are working in bettering the process for permitting, and those areas tend to be, the land area tends to be a little bit cheaper than other areas. And like Mr. Gutierrez said, there are those areas where the working class usually settles in. But we're still going to have the problem where people are going to they're going to build illegally because they need a place to live. So I'm just a little concerned about taking out the west side and east side because of those reasons. And then I wish we had a little bit more time before we make any decisions to have more information on, let me look at sorry, I was taking notes as we go. On the floor area ratio. I don't know if we have to make like a decision today. I know we're limited in time, but these are really, really important decisions that are going to affect the community. So I was wondering if we can have more discussion on that. And maybe it's just me because I'm new, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Mr. Gullett, can you take a couple of minutes then to explain floor area ratio? I know sometimes it's hard for us to study up the couple of days right before the meeting. So, and for the public that's watching.
And if you please give like real live examples and in very simple terms, And again, I apologize, but I really feel that these decisions are really, very important to our future.
Good, yes, thank you. Floor area ratio, FAR, so this is what regulates building size. So for the example, floor area ratio of 1.0 on a 5,000 square foot lot means you get a 5,000 square foot building on that lot. And this illustrates it nicely. So that example is the one in the middle. And then moving down, floor area ratio of 2.0 is two stories, lot line to lot line on that same property. So you get 10,000 square feet on the 5,000 square foot lot. So it simply limits the amount of floor area you have for your building. So, and it can take different shapes and sizes, like that bottom example. So to the right is the half lot area. So you could have a 4-story building on half the lot that is an FAR 2.0.
It's the relationship between the lot and then what you actually put on it.
Yeah.
So basically, it just gives the developer the option of doing the whole area or half of the
Ms. Brooke?
The area.
Sure. Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Gutierrez, I'll just add that we've been regulating single family homes with floor to lot area ratio since 2007. So it's treated a little bit differently when we're looking at single family homes. It is still floor area to lot area ratio, but we also have some more complicated calculations that go into that. But so it's not entirely foreign to the city. We haven't been doing it outside of single family homes though. And so, right, Mr. Gullett explained it well. If we're working with whole numbers, you can just multiply your lot area by that number, and then that's how much floor area you could have. Where it's assembled on the site is subject to other things like building height or setbacks or open space that you might need to accommodate. And that's where there's still flexibility in it. We wouldn't expect all properties to just stack that entire floor area lot line to lot line. There'd probably be a courtyard somewhere in there. That's why in the examples that we attached to the council agenda report, some of the FARs of those buildings is somewhat surprising because you might think it's a higher number, but there's actually, it's a U-shaped building around a courtyard. And so there's a fair amount of floor area that's removed from that calculation that you might not notice.
So in areas where it's like a historical district, we will be sensitive on the FAR?
Yes, so we'll be looking at adjacent uses and within historic districts too. And we are embarking on a public outreach process too. So we'll be contacting neighborhoods to get their input on these rules.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. My questions were answered. We are going to go to public comment. Ms. Gorman, we have 6 or 7 people that want to speak. So it seems like we could do 3 minutes. And I think we will eat into our deliberative comment time when we come back from the break. So be it. How many people do we have, Ms. Clerk?
Madam Mayor, we have 7 persons that have registered as attendees. I assume they all wish to speak on this item. They haven't raised their hand, but I think we can presume they wish to speak.
Let's do it. 3 minutes, everybody. Thank you.
Very good. I'll call out the names and feel free to send me a message within the app if you do not wish to speak. Cassandra Ensberg, then Dennis During, Javier Riviera, John Campanella, Krista Pleiser, Robin Elander, and Trish Allen. Cassandra Ensberg, please go ahead.
Council members, come on the screen. Ms. Ensberg?
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to pop on quickly and just say that I appreciate all of the deliberations that you're having right now. I very much appreciate the report that staff has given. I think it was very comprehensive and complete and brings up many of these issues that we're now working with. And I feel very encouraged that we can move forward and get the housing that we need in a way that will be beneficial to the city and will be beautiful. So I just simply wanted to give a shout out that way and to thank everyone for all their tremendous work. I also want to thank those of you who came to the big meeting last evening, and it was really great to see so many people there and to see your comments. So let's move forward and let's get the housing we need, and let's continue working together to achieve this important component of our community that will help us to be a more vibrant community and will help to address the critical housing issues that we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Ensberg. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Javier Rivera, then John Campanella, and then Robin Elander, and that's all the people that did indicate they wish to speak. Javier Rivera, please go ahead. Javier Rivera, please go ahead. All right, we'll come back to Javier Rivera. Next, John Campanella.
Good morning. Hi, John Campanella. Back in 2011, we came up with the parameters that were used for the AUD program. The parameters on height, also primarily density and unit size, which when you multiply it out is really floor area for a building that you can rent. We're now in 2020, and be easy to say that costs to build, including land, have doubled from that time, yet we've made no adjustment until now on how much you can build. So as we move forward, I think the idea would be, how do we create more livable area that could be rented, as was touched on before, and not have a constraints due to an FAR that may limit what you could put inside a building. As those who attended the Charette tonight saw, that numerous projects were developed using the current height limits in the city and using various building forms that we're all used to seeing, whether it be a U, a rectangle, or a big square with a paseo or parkway or something in the middle. And they were able to really double the floor area that you could live in by working within the 60-foot height limit and being efficient on their buildings. And they were all pretty consistent on what they came up with. One of the efficient ways was interior hallways versus large courtyards. And the interior hallways that gave access to a unit on each side also allowed you to make smaller units. There was a wide variety of unit types just by the ability to create more square footage within the building floors themselves. So I think if you weren't there, there's going to be a video of the meeting, and hopefully the AIA gets to make a presentation, not just during public comment, but let's say during a special period with the council as well, before we go forward and start trying to finalize calculations. The ability to build downtown is going to rely on getting parcels that are even more expensive than we've seen in the past. So even though you may not require parking, you may have to require, the applicants may have to acquire a building, have the cost to tear it down and rebuild again. So the more flexibility you can give them in what they can put inside and rent in that structure that they come up with is going to be very important. I might get radical and say, if you can fill up an older building downtown without regard to FAR, you might consider in the CBD, why can't you fill up a new building that looks the same or looks similar and fits into the landscape of the downtown area? the idea is to get housing. More flexible you can be to allow building within those structures, the more
Thank-
housing and the variety of housing we're going to get. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Robin Elander, then Javier Rivera. Robin Elander, please go ahead. Robin Elander, please go ahead. Okay, we will check in again with Javier Rivera. Javier has dropped from the call. So Robin Elander one last time. Robin Elander, if you can unmute yourself, go ahead. Okay, Madam Mayor, she was our last public speaker.
Okay, we'll close public comment and thank everybody who spoke. Ms. Chair Schwartz, if you'll come back, let's take comments from our Planning Commission. And we will again be strict on that 20 minutes. Mr. Reed, do you want to go first, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint questions as quickly as I can. So building size, 3-tier concept being supportable. I would say that the CBD is the most critical and should be prioritized. I think starting with the central business district and letting this inform everything outside of it is a good strategy. I would, in terms of supporting incentivizing affordable housing in tier 3 at a high level, yes, but knowing that the feasibility of these units being built will primarily be considering site costs, including the cost of land versus reduction to rental income. So we need private sector to build housing, and truly affordable housing will need significant subsidy, in my opinion. In terms of unit size, to introduce minimum unit sizes outside the CBD, my general opinion is to largely leave this to the market. I think the market is intelligent. I think limit to the maximum extent feasible, over-regulating and reducing flexibility. In terms of micro unit incentives, the staff report cited expedited permitting and process fee reductions. I think we should consider these additional incentives for all rental types, not just micro units. Next question was to retain existing range for maximum unit sizes or study reducing. I would strongly encourage retaining existing maximum unit sizes. 811 feet is fine. I think unit sizes will be reduced through FAR incentives. Developers will build smaller units if there are no density limitations, and this allows simply for flexibility in housing for all households into the future, which needs to be a primary consideration. Adaptive reuse, open yard, flexibility, setbacks, parking, etc. Yes, of course. Require ground floor commercial in some places. Generally, I trust the market, so I would say no, but in terms of a compromise, I think street frontage spaces in designated commercial districts could work. So in the case of the central business district, not the entire district, just State Street, and consider providing flexibility for the rest of the ground floor that doesn't front the street. Building heights allow up to 60 feet by right. I think leave up to 60 feet for all rental projects, not just the affordable ones, due to the high cost constraints, site costs in the central business district. The general plan states that we should allow as much housing as possible within resource limits. I think this is consistent with the general plan, and if we have this willingness to maximize units, we need to consider this. Retaining existing height limits adjacent to some streets. I think this simply needs a map to delineate. Height should be a function of a zone drawn on a map. If we want to reduce the height in certain areas, those areas should be a zone drawn on a map. I think lastly, require transitions adjacent to residential zones, yes, but please be conscious of creating more uncertainty. Solar, yes. Increase flexibility, decrease or eliminate uncertainty. I think the mantra from AIA should be adopted in our policy planning. Building form flexibility combined with floor area efficiency leads to project feasibility. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Wiscombe?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very quickly through these, I support the FAR tier concept, but as Councilmember Harmon said, I think the specific numbers are going to be very important. And I also support targeting low to moderate income categories since we are sufficiently behind in our RHNA numbers in these categories. I support the minimum size of the micro units in the CBD. And outside the CBD, I'm hearing different reports from council members Gutierrez and Gutierrez. So I think more work needs to be done there. But as Councilmember Friedman said, we need to support diversity in unit sizes. So some flexibility needs to be there. I support adaptive reuse of existing commercial and office buildings for residential development. And I would encourage people who have first floor commercial that maybe we should have incentives on buildings that use first floor commercial to open up shops that are made locally or buy locally. I think it's one of our general plan policies, and it would be interesting to see some incentives there. Since height is an unintentional deterrent to development, as Mr. Gullett stated, I may support different height limits in different locations, but I think 60 feet needs to be very thoughtful to all the implications, including transitions to residential zones. And although I'm weary of seeing projects that are solar ready and not installing solar, I think that solar structures that are appropriately designed and screened to the maximum extent possible, as the staff report said, are subjective requirements. So I think this requires more work towards objectivity and clarity to developers of these projects. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Those are my comments.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being time efficient. Another planning commissioner with opinion at this point? Ms. Schwartz, Mr. Escobedo, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm just gonna be as quick as possible. FA tiers, I am interested in us moving forward, but the details are gonna be so important. So I look forward to seeing those. I am interested in targeting low to moderate income. I would say interested more in the moderate. We have the housing authority that's been doing a great job at getting the low. We really haven't seen the moderate income units. Minimum sizes, incentivizing micro units in the central business district is going to be key. Maximums, we keep it the same. In terms of outside the CBD, it's hard for me to imagine how we're going to develop what the minimums are to get the outcomes that we want. It's kind of a moving target. So I'm interested to see what staff come up with, but I might also be okay with keeping the minimums the same for this outside the CBD. Adaptive reuse, maximum flexibility on open yard, on parking to make that happen. Requiring first floor in community serving areas. So San Andreas definitely comes to mind. The CBD comes to mind. I'm in favor of that. Allowing 60 feet, I think we need to explore allowing 60 feet by right in the central business district, definitely. And then possibly for rental projects in general, if we're trying to maximize our capacity. And perhaps it means that if a developer is willing to provide 20% inclusionary, then they by right, they get the 60 feet for a rental project. Require a transition area. Again, this is one of those moving targets and what that looks like. I'm somewhat agnostic right now, but I'm interested in having that conversation. And then incentivizing solar, I think that's a little misleading. I think really what we're doing here is removing the penalty for installing solar. And I, like Vice Chair Wiscombe, would like to see objective standards, and I would like to move away from the language that we saw earlier and make sure that this is really a ministerial process rather than a subjective process. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It was interesting that the Tier 2 example is 3 stories, 40 feet at 634 Anacapa, across from the Paradise Cafe. Tier 3 example is this Housing Authority project at 251 South Hope. It's four stories in 43 feet, 6 inches. Greater height is not needed. One architect has said he can't do 4 stories in 45 feet while he has a project under construction, which is 4 stories in 45 feet at 414 Chapala Street. I could see going with FAR tiers. I think it should target low to moderate income with emphasis on moderate. I think unit size minimums. I wonder about the market for micro units, but you know, someone wants to build them, so be it. Maximums. I think the maximums in the AUD ordinance could come down a bit. Adaptive reuse, yes, there is flexibility. Using the Balboa building for an example, as I've said before to council, it has a very large footprint, which means it has a very large, very flat roof, and it would all be usable for open space. It also has, it's a U-shaped building with a large courtyard. These projects have the ability to provide the open yard requirement that's currently required, and which is so essential to livability for these units, especially if we're going to be building smaller ones. And so absolutely not allow high 60 feet except for projects like Sanctuary City, Sanctuary. That's not the right name, but anything else. And incentivizing the solar, that would depend on how it is designed. There was a project that the city proposed on top of the Granada Garage that got a real thumbs down from HLC because it can be done, I'm sure. So it is not an eyesore, but it needs to be well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Higgins, ready to go?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Building size, FAR tiers is fine, but the magic is in what those numbers are. So we'll have to vet that more thoroughly. I don't know that FARs are going to be really something we want to burden developers with in the CBD, but they're certainly appropriate elsewhere. There's already a lot of development standards that are going to help us downtown. And if we eliminate the densities in downtown, we don't necessarily need the FAR. And I think we do need to eliminate densities. Densities always comes back to how many people and how many cars. And if we are progressive as a city and not requiring or allowing a lot of parking associated with these units, and we're better maximizing the parking lots we have that are not being maximized right now, then we won't really see a big impact on density that density may traditionally bring, because there's no cars that come along with it. I'm continually sort of disappointed and perplexed at why we need to incentivize rental over and above ownership units. It's disappointing to me that this city doesn't recognize the equity disparity that rental units brings. If you want to keep dealing with land barons that are intractable downtown, then keep giving them apartments. I think we really should be focusing more on, or at least some, on ownership opportunities in condominiums, those, it's well established that homeowners, take better care and are more invested in their community if they have equity. And when you have apartments, all the equity goes back to the developer. So I don't quite get that. I think it doesn't really matter who or how these units are lived in. It comes back to what they look like. So on height, to be more blunt than Miss Brooke, but was a good response nonetheless. The 60-foot height limit was stolen from the city when it was part of the Measure B. It was put squarely at 60 feet, and it was stolen by the council at that time to burden applicants of 60-foot tall projects to make additional findings. And so I think that ought to be eliminated if we can. With respect to solar, that's a question for HLC and ABR members to wrangle with. I do think there's an inherent aesthetic issue that would be part of our skyline that I don't know that we really want, but I look forward to hearing from ABR members on that. And I think I've run out of subjects, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. Ms. Bonderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Chair Schwartz. Starting at the top with the FAR tiers, I do support the FAR tier concept as well, but I agree with a few people before me who chimed in agreement with Councilmember Harmon. I think that more specifics will be needed before we're able to make any specific decisions. I think that's really important, but I think we're on the right track. With regard to the targeting of low and moderate income, yes, I absolutely agree that we need to focus on those, but I think that maximum attention should be on the moderate, simply because that middle is still missing and we're trying to fill that in, fill in the gaps of what we need in our city. With regard to the minimum unit sizes, I personally have issue with the livability of a 220 square foot space. And I question the long-term possibilities for someone to remain in a space like this with decent, livability. And I'm interested in knowing more about the sustainability of that kind of lifestyle. I understand that it's probably a transitional space for people who might be looking at expanding their family or saving up money, but I still think that it would require some study to see if it's really appropriate in Santa Barbara and in our form of living here. That being said, I'm not against it. I would like to hear more about it potentially before we make decisions. With regard to the maximum, I don't support reducing it. I think that we should have all size units available, and therefore we should leave it as it is, definitely not reduce it. Have that option available. And we should be focusing on rent control and other kinds of ways of helping maximize that level of rent so we maintain affordability and not just reduce size. We should be focusing on reducing cost. And I know those are universally put together, but I think that we should be focusing on that also, so that we're not just shrinking the units. With regard to the first floor commercial, I am in absolute favor of encouraging to keep that commercial space on the ground floor to allow the shopping and dining experiences along the street. And I would like to know more about how we can really help make that sustainable, whether it is to help limit rent maximums or other ways of supporting our businesses. Building heights. I believe that the 60-foot height should continue to be discretionary so that we are able to monitor and regulate what kind of structures do get that additional height. I'm open to other options and other ways of getting that height, but I do think that it should continue to be monitored. And therefore, With regard to the transitional area, I also strongly believe that we should continue to study this concept. I am a huge supporter of this idea because from an urban design standpoint, I think that it's really important to provide variety and space between building heights and not make everything standard all the way across just because it fits into the ordinance. I think that it should be reviewed and monitored. Last but not least, with regard to the solar, I think that we should remove the penalty. However, I do think that it should not exceed the 60-foot height, and nothing should exceed the 60-foot height without discretionary approval.
Okay.
Thank you very
Very
much.
good. Thanks so much. Chair Schwartz, your comments?
Yes, thank you very much. So let's start with building size and FAR tiers. I am in support of the concept, and I think more discussion with greater education before deliberation would be recommended. And in terms of the target for the income level, I just want to point out in attachment 2 in our packet today that 1,663 units have been allocated, and the Housing Authority and People Self-Help specialize and are excellent in this very low and low, and really where we need to focus that we've been significantly behind is in the moderate. And by the way, in the above moderate, we have a majority of the units that have been constructed are actually accessory dwelling units, not AUD rentals. So focus on moderate. Now I'm going to go to unit size. I would like us to provide a policy that allows for and even encourages, with some limitations, unit sizes that are smaller than the current average unit size under the AUD program. But again, more discussion needs to happen there. And with regard to what we're talking about as micro units, there are best practices from other cities, specifically San Francisco and Los Angeles, that I would suggest that staff be directed to research that could help us make enlightened decisions around this. Because I think from what I'm hearing today, I'm not sure that they're really well understood in terms of providing an additional segment to the rental market. Going to adaptive reuse, yes, maximum flexibility, fine with requiring one floor commercial. I think we need to encourage as much adaptive reuse as possible. Building heights, I think it was unfortunate that a vote of the people was not honored. And so now I think we face a very complex set of decisions about how and when we allow for the building height that the voters enacted some years ago. And when I look at the staff recommendations, I am in support of a staff statement here on page 6 of the staff report, that with objective criteria required, we can allow to exceed a certain height and that be codified in the zoning ordinance and made clear, and to not require separate action by a discretionary body. But again, devil's in the details there. Incentivizing solar or removing obstacles, I'm definitely in support of that. And the way staff has phrased the recommendations on page 7 of our staff report, again, it includes that they be appropriately designed and screened to the maximum extent possible. And I'd also like to add, as I identified in my questions, there are amendments to the AUD program that were discussed almost a year ago and were not discussed today. And I just want to reference one specific administrative change. It's both in attachment 1 and it's on the city's website, and that is to consider local preference for inclusionary housing. We talk so much about the importance of housing our local workers, but this has not been fleshed out. I don't know if the city attorney's office has evaluated it vis-a-vis federal law, Fair Housing Act, but I say let's get going on developing a dimension or a component to our multi-unit housing program that will really allow for local preference. And I feel we're a little behind on working on that. That's it for today, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. We're a little behind schedule, but we do need a break for our translators and for our tech staff. We are now in recess for 10 minutes. We'll be right back. jump on the screen and let us know their opinion on these things. I know, maybe I'll start by clarifying with Ms. Brooke that after this, the next stop is you're doing some public outreach. If we decide to make a change to the zoning ordinance, that has to go to Planning Commission. What do you say, Ms. Brooke?
Yes, Madam Mayor, in terms of next steps for this particular work effort, after we receive this initial direction, we will continue with public outreach through the end of the year, reach out to stakeholders, and then we begin to have public hearings with Planning Commission, Architectural Board of Review, Historic Landmarks Commission early into spring of next year. Yes, thank you. So that's the general timeline we anticipate from here on through to summer.
Okay, and I don't think any questions came up in the public comment. Mr. Higgins gave us a little bit of a history lesson there on building heights, but well, if no one is jumping on, I guess I can go first for a change. There, Mr. Jordan.
Sure, I'll let you go first, Madam Mayor. So, so I'll try and go really quick. I wrote down a lot of notes. There's a lot of really good stuff said, and I'm going to just mimic really some other things I heard in terms of what I like. But to me, the most important thing to come to grips with today is a overall reaffirmation of a policy goal in what we're deciding. And so I just wrote something down because it's easier for me to write it down than remember it. But to me personally, what I'm interested in is working to provide a path for increased housing development, particularly in the downtown area, while protecting the look and feel of Santa Barbara, but acknowledging that look and feel will begin to transition to a new look and feel. If you can't acknowledge that that's what we're doing, or you're unwilling to support that's what we're doing, I think there's a contradiction there with what we are trying to do and the policy we're trying to work on. I'm interested in doing that in a manner that makes opportunities and doesn't take away opportunities, or doesn't keep the opportunity level at what it is now. I want to improve the opportunities. I'm interested in protecting the look and the feel, or the cultural and historical aspect, but it has to be in a manner that begins to integrate the old with the new, not that makes the new subject to the old. That is the future. I know there's differences of opinion on that, but that has to be the starting place of, in my view, of where we're going with this. When I was taking notes, I'm about 100% in agreement with everything that Commissioner Reed said. The tiers are a great idea. The devil's going to be in the details. I'll be really disappointed if I start to see tier numbers that mimic what's already there on the street. I think the goal of the tiers is to allow a progression to new opportunities. So the examples that are on the street right now are what's there already. And I think we need more than what's there already, however you define more opportunities, whether that's height, width, setbacks, whatever it's going to be. So examples I've seen with tiers down in the 1.5s, the 2, the 2.5s, to me need to really be in the 4s or greater to have opportunities. And then we let the design teams do their thing. It still has to be a great design, but we allow the tiers and the FAR numbers in those tiers to be opportunities and not restrictions. I like the idea of leaving the unit sizes to the market, but keeping the maximum sizes so that we don't end up with the equivalent back to variable density. I like incentives for all of the rental types. I'm concerned about adaptive reuse. I think it's been over romanticized, particularly in older buildings that are lot line to lot line with no windows, because you can't put a residential unit in without a window in a bedroom to escape. There has to be more than one way out of your unit by state building code, I believe. So I'm concerned. I don't know that there's really a bang for the time and effort when you talk about adaptive reuse. You can cherry pick some ones out, but I don't really know that that's prevalent out there for the time we would spend working on that. I like 60 feet for all rental units by right. I'm willing to talk about where in particular areas where they shouldn't be, protections to historical areas, transition areas into those areas, or traditions into older neighborhood types of things. But I think generally we should start to look to more height for rental units. And solar, I think, solar meets so many needs of everything that we want to talk about. Reducing our greenhouse gases, making us independent from the electrical grid. We have to find a way to allow solar by right, as Commissioner Escobedo said, to remove the penalty of planning for solar and resolve that it's allowed rather than you get penalized for trying to do that. Some of the other items I saw, Commissioner Wiscombe's making sure that we maintain a diversity in unit sizes. And then Commissioner Higgins, I know, is beating this drum for a long time, but I agree too, that there has to be a method, particularly when you're talking about smaller units targeting the moderate, or what we would decide as the percentage for moderate qualifications to get to ownership status. And so without getting into being in the market again for large, expensive market rate condos, but for market rate condos that are of a size, location, and function that a moderately employed person or a little above can take a run at those, and again, begin to fill that void of moderate home ownership with that connection to the community. And in particular, I think those are just begging to be done in the downtown area. Those would be my comments. Those are my quick efforts. And again, it's important for me today that we at least reaffirm what our goal is, that we're here for a method of increasing housing, from removing restrictions, creating opportunity, and that with that opportunity, we're going to see both a respect and an acknowledgement of the look and feel of Santa Barbara, but a realization that it's going to change a little bit, and that we're going to work hard to make that change gradual and minimal, but that we're going to see some change. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Before we go to Ms. Sneddon, I guess I just want to challenge you and Commissioner Higgins, let's work on that. I think there was an effort back in 2017 to pursue, how do we make incentives for home ownership and condominiums? And it never, well, I wouldn't say it never went anywhere, but we need to pick it up again.
I'm in, and literally I'm in. And the way I'm in is not to see something, just to pick on a project, not to see something at the base of Chapala that's a 2,500 square foot house as a market rate condominium, but a 800 square foot unit or a 600 square foot unit that is a market rate condominium. Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
Thank you. Very good. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, your comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's exciting because I think there's going to be that area that I'm in complete agreement with Councilmember Jordan and with Commissioner Higgins on the opportunities for ownership. So, but I'll start with, since we're sort of reaffirming where we're heading with this, I don't believe the current state of the AUD program is creating the housing that we're asking for and that we're hoping for. Having said that, the housing that we really need is for that moderate income earning capacity. And with that, we have to incentivize and look at how to allow those moderate income earners to build equity and have those opportunities for ownership and growth. And something that happens over the generations, we all know this, my peers, your peers probably, we leave Santa Barbara to go and build our equity, to start our careers, to be able to make enough so that we can come back at some point. And when we come back, we start over again. And when we try to build equity, when we come back, we're behind. And I really, really want to prioritize these opportunities for moderate income earners to have ownership and looking at that really seriously. And in some ways, I think the AUD program incentivizing so many rentals takes away from that opportunity and development of those types of opportunities. So I really would like to see that worked in here, and count me in also on seeing that work out. So going down this list for building size, for the FAR tiers, yes, I support the concept, and of course the numbers matter. I mean, I don't think any of us here are saying whatever those numbers are, go for it. I mean, it really matters what they are. I would like on that to target the moderate, and then also I think in those tiers is the opportunity to target ownership units. I think we could do that with tiers and with incentives in that way, and really start building that base in equity. And then I really think it's worthwhile. I know other cities do this. There are models for this, for looking at maximum density for a block or for a zone or for a neighborhood. I think we can handle a lot more density, but we can't handle it everywhere all at once. And I think that has been my sort of constant issue with the AUD program, is that it's very blocky. It's a whole zones and go. And I think if it really gets going, you know, we have interest rate change, or the price of construction goes down miraculously, or something else happens, we could all of a sudden have a flood in development where we maybe didn't intend that. So we want more housing. We want it in certain price ranges of availability, but I don't think we want all things everywhere all the time. And that continues to be something I'd like to look at with the FARs. For unit size, minimum, yes, but I think we do need to look at individual zones. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, I had not thought of that if you're taking up spaces with micro units and parking, that you may be taking away from other opportunities for ownership. And that's something I think we have to look at really carefully. I know in San Roque, we have a lot of different sizes of living units and ADUs. We could have micro units. There's a whole portion where there are motels along there above Constance that could be housing instead, if we incentivize that right and looked at that. So I'm not willing to say no micro units in some places, and how about instead we incentivize the micro units along transit or downtown. Again, the details obviously matter. For adaptive reuse, flexibility, yes, I think we need to be even more flexible on this. Whatever it takes, my framework right now is whatever it takes to turn Macy's and Nordstrom into housing. So if we're looking at it through that lens, if there's something that we're doing that's standing in the way of that type of adaptive reuse, that's what I want to look at. I do not want to be standing in the way of the possibility of those large vacuous spaces becoming housing. We have enough buildings. We have a lot of buildings in the city, and many of them are vacant, vacuous, open. Let's make it housing. Let's really target, and maybe we have a special category for if something is a certain amount of square footage, it's vacant, that gets a special dispensation or a special incentive for what is it going to take to turn that into housing, not have these big empty spaces and not just have building for building's sake. It really needs to be targeted to that moderate income and to entry level ownership opportunities. I think we could have more legally non-conforming allowances. I would consider replacing like for like. So say the Nordstrom building, for instance, and this is just an example, it's already quite tall, quite large. If there was going to be new construction there, if they weren't going to repurpose that building, then I would say, well, it could be the same size in height and bulk as what it is now, that it wouldn't have to go through that whole process again of size, bulk, and scale. If something already has that bulk and scale existing, fine, move forward with that, make that housing, whatever we can do to not stand in the way of that. The requiring first floor commercial, I don't want to require that. I would like to leave it up to the developer, but also, it really depends on what that first floor is. If it's a, bistro or a market or something that stays lively in the evening, then I think it's great. But something I really would be concerned about, or something that I notice in the development on Coda that has the farmers insurance at the bottom, that's in the evening and after school time, that's like a dead zone. And it's across from a park, it's across from a school, it's in an area that to me should be lively. There should be something more, something that's open later that public can move in and out of. So it doesn't, I'm not thinking that it should just be any commercial use of a floor space, no matter what. But it really would matter what it is. And I think a developer could really look at what would work in an area and what could bring vitality to a neighborhood. So I don't really want to require that. And in some ways, it can really kill a bottom floor of a space when you're walking by and make a neighborhood not feel as safe or not feel as welcoming. Building heights. We already allow for 60 feet in some cases, so leave it. We just looked at this at council, and I wasn't a fan of increasing the heights. The majority was, but we just increased them. So to now just say, I'm not a fan of going up to 60, but if we're replacing like for like, that is a way that some developers might be able to use that. If a building is already existing and it's 60 feet and you want to repurpose that space to be housing, then I'm okay with that. That's already in the sight line, the shadow line, view corridors. It's already there, so I wouldn't have a problem with that. But we just bumped it up, and I feel like we should just let that rest. We're going to have this constant tension between those who want to push it to the maximum and those who would like it to be less. And I think right now we're at a sort of compromise between the two, and I would encourage staying there at compromise. And lastly, incentivizing solar. Yes, this is the way we need to be heading as a city. The design matters, of course. We need to get that settled with input from HLC, ABR. We need to know what the parameters are, but it has to be made easy. We just got solar at home, and the whole package included the vendors getting the permit. It took 2 weeks. It was super easy, and we wouldn't have done it if it was going to be something that required us to be going in and pleading our case. And we want to be sensitive to how things look, but we need to be sustainable and taking care of our emissions in that way. So those are my comments, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Mr. Friedman, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Appreciate the comments from first two council members and PC. So I'll just start by kicking it off that I think there's a lot of moving pieces here. And I think ultimately there should be a discussion. Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon's mentioned this a few times as well. And I have, is to have a citywide plan, but you could have a general look at the entire city that lines up where we want certain development out there. And there's a lot of work that's already been done in that effort. And that would be a multi-year effort down the line. But I think if we're going to be transitioning different parts of the city, it would be helpful to have that. And that's a discussion that could come up at a later time, but it would be helpful in terms of where we want to plan our city going forward. So I'll start just going forward with the building size. I am supportive of the FAR and the tiers, but it needs to take into consideration the different neighborhoods. Different neighborhoods will have different tiers or different FAR ratios. And also the staff report tier 1 is based on the ownership, which for it. So I think that with the discussion of ownership, I concur with what's been said today, that we do need to look at ownership. And if ownership is just the base tier, but all the rentals have more incentives, we might actually be disincentivizing some of the ownership. So we need to understand what that means and how we can incentivize the ownership on the entry-level condos. Because that's a way a lot of people will be able to stay here and get into those entry-level condos and build some equity that you could eventually move your way up or stay in a condo for many years if you're able to. So the other thing I just wanted to add to that is that with ownership, you're going to have people that can stay in neighborhoods for a long time, in decades even, whereas with rentals, you might not. And that gets into the unit size and specifically the minimums that we're proposing of the 220. I need to understand that more because I'm not convinced that 220 is actually something we should be shooting for or making it a major part of our rental portfolio. So I want to understand what the minimum is. And because if it is that little, you are going to have more transition within the neighborhood. And one of the things we should be looking at is to have residents that will be there long-term who contribute to that neighborhood over a long time. And if it's just for 220, you're going to have people coming in and going more frequently. So I need to understand what the minimum is. I do support the maximum because we've already seen what happens without it. But I want to understand what that number is. Do we leave it at 811 or do we modify it? Getting into adaptive, or one last thing with that is that going back to building size, sorry, I forgot about the moderate income or not. I believe we need for this program, it needs to focus on the moderate income, but also go from 120 to 160. And the reason is there are a lot, I mentioned it earlier, there are a lot of jobs in town that go above the 120% that we need here that are critical workforce jobs. And how that gets into our arena numbers, but I think that we need to go from 80 to 160 and figure out a way to get there. In terms of lower income, I think that we have the Housing Authority and our nonprofit partners that build that housing, and they have, not only have they been very successful at it, they have access to many more tools to create that. So I think this program should focus on moderate and the 120 to 160. Going to adaptive reuse, I think much has been said on that. I support it, giving it the flexibility it needs. The first floor commercial requirement, I think it should be a priority, but not a requirement. And the reason is we don't know what the commercial market is. And if there's a lot of commercial in a certain area, it might not be feasible to have more commercial there. So I guess that's something we need to look at is what flexibility do we have to provide commercial or not on the first floor. I think Councilmember Sneddon, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon made a good point that some of these businesses close at 5 o'clock and they become dead zones. So giving flexibility within that is a good idea. Building heights, I believe we should just leave where we're at now. I think former Mayor Lodge made some very eloquent comments on it. And I think that we just raised it to 48. Let's see how it works. I don't support going to 60 at this time unless it's a special community benefit, but we do need to retain that that discretionary review for going up higher. So I wouldn't support moving forward with that at this time. And then solar, I think I'm in agreement with my colleagues on this, that we need to incentivize solar. And the one thing I would just say is if we could get a design template that is basically ministerial for solar projects, so we have those design criterias and take into some of these considerations. So it's basically you just come in and that's it. It doesn't make it overly burdensome. I'd be supportive of that. And so with that, I think that was, oh, the last thing is for ownership, employer-sponsored housing, even rental, but employer-sponsored housing, such as the St. Francis Project, where people can come in and work a critical workforce and build that equity. Even though it's reduced in some way because it's price controlled, but to have that is a major supportive. So how we can look at continuing that and encouraging more of that would be something I'd like to look at.
Thanks. Ms. Harmon?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to start first, just echoing Councilmember Jordan's sort of global comment with regard to our overarching purpose here. And he said it so well, I really couldn't agree with him more, that our purpose here is to increase housing stock, to increase opportunity to develop housing, to do so while protecting the character of our community, but recognizing that it will mean evolution for us as a city. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's important that we're willing to evolve and that we do so thoughtfully. So I really appreciated his framing and just want to second that very strongly. I also want to note before I go through the discussion points that I too strongly support opportunities for middle income ownership opportunities. You know, that's speaking to my family in particular, and I know a lot of families like my own would be very grateful for increased opportunities to build equity, to call something their own. But I certainly hope and would insist that we're able to do two things at once: to continue facilitating and pursuing rental housing, because that is necessary and needed in our community, while also encouraging ownership opportunities. I think it's just absolutely critical that we don't do one at the expense of the other necessarily, that we commit ourselves to doing both and to thinking critically about how to encourage both, as both are needed. So with that, I'll start with the building size. As I said, as a number of our colleagues have indicated, the devil is in the details here. I'm supportive of the concept to the extent that FARs actually increase flexibility for our developer partners. What I don't want to see is another set of requirements or challenges or just like difficulties for folks. I mean, I hear that this is a means to increase flexibility for development, and that's what I want to see. So I would just put that out there as my intention for moving us as a city to FARs. Agree with the various tiers. I think those are great ideas, and similarly would want to emphasize the moderate income. I agree with Councilmember Friedman that we should consider increasing the spectrum of income levels. And I personally had been toying with the idea of going up beyond 160, even to 200%. If we look at the range of incomes in our community, I think there are a lot of moderate income folks who find themselves in the 160 to 200 bracket. Putting that out there is something I'd be interested in learning more about, but I do agree with him about expanding the category of moderate for this tier. On unit size, I also would like to see variety in unit size. That's a priority for me, but in general, I think we should trust the market on this. That's sort of where I'm at. You know, the maximum seems like a good idea, but really I do want to trust the market, and that will lead into my comments on micro units. I just want to say briefly, again, if the market bears out that there's a need for these units, that's great. But I do share Commissioner Bonderson's concern about whether that's actually true. And I would encourage all of my colleagues, both on council and on planning commission, to remember that those of us who live in the downtown are a community too. We have families too. We want to stay in our downtown community. And so to the extent we have discussions about whether they're appropriate on the east side or the west side, those are really important discussions. But there are also those of us who want to build up our family community downtown as well. So I would just ask that we all remember that while the CBD is an important, absolutely vital commercial center, you know, there are those of us who want to build our families here too, and we shouldn't be left out of the conversation. And I think my neighbors would be disappointed if I didn't flag that for all of us. Height, yes, I do support the 60 feet. With respect to my colleagues, I think it's important that we provide opportunities, particularly in the CBD, for doing so. So I do support that. I agree we can talk about transitional areas. We can talk about how to be sensitive to our historical resources and our historical areas. But I think it's important that especially as we push to get the kind of housing that we want to see at the affordability levels that we want to see, that we balance the scales a bit and really try to facilitate that. So I do support that. And finally, adaptive reuse. Yes, of course. Also agree, I think it was Councilmember Jordan that said we need to be aware this may be a little bit of a red herring, but to the extent that we can facilitate it, it's awesome. Commissioner Reed, I think, suggested maybe requiring only a frontage area on Straight Street for commercial. That's a good idea, but I do want us to be as flexible as possible here because I think it's in the interest of our whole community that if we can reuse, we do. And then finally, quickly, yes, of course, let's remove the penalty. Thank you, Commissioner Escobedo, for that framing. I think that's a great way of looking at solar. Remove the penalty to do it. It's good for our community, it's good for our future, and it's the way to go. So with that, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harmon. And I will go ahead and give my commentary. I don't see other council members popping on. The FAR, Ms. Gutierrez, if you're ready, then you can go ahead. I wasn't sure. Alejandra Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be very brief because I think a lot of my colleagues covered some of my thoughts. I definitely want more discussion on the FAR tiers. I really liked what Mr. Escobedo mentioned about the incentive for solar. Also, I would really like what Ms. Schwartz said about local preference for multi-housing projects. Really would like to support what Ms. Wiscom mentioned about made locally, buy locally incentive for commercial properties for that first floor. And Mr. Reed mentioned about all rental sizes incentives, not just micro units. So those are the things that I really strongly support.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Gutierrez, ready? Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I will keep mine brief as well since a lot of my colleagues hit the points that I wanted to cover. When it comes to the FARs, I'm supportive of it, but just like a lot of the my colleagues have said that the numbers are important. One thing that I keep harping on this, but I really want to have a serious discussion about whether or not we can have these property owners consider the fact that they can build out on their land as long as they require their tenants to not own cars for multiple reasons, for the fact that they're building more units and for the environment and for just being able to keep the other residents in that area from feeling like they're being overwhelmed by cars. When it comes to the target low moderate, I feel like obviously there's a missing middle, but the reason there's a missing middle is because everyone's in the lower income bracket. So I feel like we have to be able to do more to provide housing for the lower income to be able to bring them up to the moderate. So that's something that I think we should be focused on more. Let's see. When it comes to the require first floor commercial, I'm for that, but I'm worried that some developers and property owners are going to use that as an excuse to later convert the units they built to be motels or hotels or something along those lines. So I just kind of want to throw that out there that we need to be wary of that possibility. When it comes to the building heights, I feel like I agree with Ms. Sneddon, the 45 feet is tall enough. I've been to several cities where it feels like you're in a canyon when you're walking down streets. And the one thing I hear from people that come to Santa Barbara is they love how open the skyline is here. And I want to just keep to that as much as possible. I'm also all about ownership and building equity for people here. That's how literally all my friends and my parents were able to start lives here, and I just want to continue seeing that. For the incentivizing the solar panels and removing fees, obviously that's just the way of the future, and we should be encouraging that as much as possible. I want to, comment on Commissioner Bonderson's rent stabilization mention. I think we should have a conversation about that, as well, to see if whether or not that's something that we can implement in our community. And also, I would like to also comment on Chair Schwartz, local preference on low income housing. That's something that we should also be focused on doing. So yeah, those are the points I just wanted to comment on, other than the ones that I agree with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. So I support the FAR tiers, details to be worked out. Yes, let's target low and moderate income. Staff was pretty clear making an argument for maximum unit sizes. It is to provide the needed and desired right-sized housing. Otherwise, we'll get the big luxury units. And, some of us live right now in 800, 900 square feet properties. They're livable. In the 200 square feet, those efficiency studios, I have to remind my colleagues, I'm on a call every other week with homelessness workers and advocates for creating housing. There are people who happily live in studio apartments, and they'll live in them forever. People who are coming off the street, people who are retiring, especially if it's downtown. And I do support micro units in the right locations. Mr. Friedman, maybe I'm talking to you or other people who were like, Ms. Bonderson, how can someone live in such a small space? They do, and they will. And there's a big hue and cry for that kind of small size living space. Adaptive reuse, yes, as much flexibility as possible. If you're following the economy, the trends in retail, that commercial space is in flux. It's retail's never going to come back. And now that people have figured out how to do work and meetings through this process like we're doing now, virtual office space will become more available as well. So I would not require first floor commercial, that way that there would be more flexibility. In terms of building heights, Mr. Higgins, thanks so much for reminding us about what happened with that vote. It was 2009. I remember it specifically. I was a reporter. And the people said, we need a little extra height to get more affordable housing. I don't know how anyone could even argue with that. And I get it. We don't want towering buildings in the wrong places. So allowing 60 feet for some, in some cases, if it's rental, if it's providing housing or services for vulnerable populations. I really, it was the vote of the people, and it got overturned in a political move. So we can make that right, actually, if we want to. Incentivizing solar, I really like how staff put it. Staff recommends solar arrays and supporting structures not count towards the building height as long as they are appropriately designed and screened to the maximum extent possible. We haven't talked much about climate change, but that is something that we do need to focus on. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Giving incentives to affordable housing developers, and certainly this effort to provide condominium purchase or ownership opportunities does not replace the need for rentals in this city. We need both, but the AUD is all about rentals, and it's giving us housing. RENA is coming up, going to be in our faces, and we need to create housing in all the different tiers. I'm going to call Ms. Brooke back to see, or Mr. Gullett, do you need us to take a vote on anything, or are you taking good notes as to where we stand with direction?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All of this input has been great, and I don't think you need to take specific votes on any of this. We've been taking notes. Really appreciate the thoughtful discussion and feedback, and this does help us provide some direction for our next steps going forward. So thanks.
Thank you. So the workload will come to the City Council on another agenda, another time. Thank you very much. Ms. Clerk, okay, I will ask, because we have 1 minute, is anyone wanting to make general public comment? I did say I would open a little window here at the end of the meeting. Ms. Gorman?
Madam Mayor, we have Richard Clausen has raised his hand. Robin Elander is on and didn't speak earlier, so I will call on Mr. Clausen and Ms. Elander if you do wish to
2 minutes.
speak, let me know.
Let's just do a quick 2 minutes, and these are for topics that don't have to do with planning. We kind of set that parameter earlier. So I'll set my clock to 2 minutes. Mr. Clausen.
Very good. Mr. Clausen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and council members and commissioners. I've sent you my comments in a letter, and I just want to emphasize a couple of points. It said that people who go to New York City, I'm sorry, it said that New Yorkers know visitors to New York City, tourists, because we're the ones who are always gawking at their tall buildings. And I would hope that in the future, that wouldn't apply to Santa Barbans, who might lose track of how our city building size has increased, sort of like frogs in a slow boil, due to the individual nature.
Mr. Clausen, I need to stop you because that would have been commentary before our voting, and we read your email. We got your little message right here, so thank you. And we'll go to Ms. Was it Unander or Elander? We have a couple of Robins in our universe. Which one was it?
This is Robin Elander.
Elander, okay. Ms. Elander?
Ms. Elander, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and go ahead. Ms. Elander, go ahead. Okay, Madam Mayor, she was our final public speaker.
Okay, she's in touch with us on other stuff. I'm sure she'll let us know. So thank you to our technical staff, our translators, to our planning staff, our commission, our planning commission. Thank you, Commissioner Chair Schwartz. Thank you so much for presiding with me. And we'll go ahead and close this meeting. Meeting adjourned.